Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. We're back for another episode, and right now I am joined by Megan. What's up, Megan?
Hey, how's it going?
So good. So good. So good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me. She's not a guest. She's the faithful co-host. And on these episodes where we interview a guest, what's kind of fun is we get to introduce the guest a little bit. But right now we're kind of in the middle of a series on the podcast. What are we talking about?
Yeah, we've been talking about remembering and just the importance of our stories and looking back at what we've gone through, what God's done in our lives. And so we kind of introduced that on last week's episode, just the idea of looking back, the importance of it, kind of what holds you back from it as well. And so today we have a special guest with Laurie P. Short.
Yes, Laurie is somebody that I actually met a few years ago through a former podcast that we were a part of. And Laurie's an author. She lives in Santa Barbara, California. She's spoken in front of like 500,000 people in conferences and church settings. And she just really has a gift of connecting with people. And her story is really impactful in a lot of ways. And you're going to learn more about it today. But she talks about a broken off engagement and a very interesting story of her dad remarrying somebody very similar in age to her and just the effect of that in her life. But this episode, what she's really talking about is tracking God in your life. And so as we look back, sometimes it's easy to see the pitfalls, the wounds, the hard things. But this conversation is all about, well, how do we find God in our stories? And so we get to share from her book, Tracking God in Your Life. And it's just a really great book. I got to read it kind of on the front side of this conversation, but it's not like any other book. It's very like journal focused. And so every chapter has an opportunity to kind of engage. And she talks about, this isn't my book, this is your book, and how this gets to become your story and track God in your life. And so I'm really excited for this episode. And we're so excited. What are we going to do with this book?
We're going to give it away.
Yeah, we are. We are. So if you listen to the end, we've got some details on how you can potentially get this book. But without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Laurie P. Short. Hey, everybody. We are joined today by Laurie P. Short. How are you doing, Laurie?
I'm good, Stephen. How are you doing?
I am doing great. It's been a little while, but it's fun to be in the same virtual world as you again.
I know. It has been a whole book later on your part.
I know. And yours as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Except I think you were in the exact place you're in now, and I was in a very different spot. So, but it's so fun to have you back on the podcast and talk a little bit about your new book, Tracking God in Your Life. And I'm just so excited to talk about that and this story and this journey. But you got to tell me a little bit. You wrote this book in a very different way. It is very reflective, and there's spots for us to fill in the blank. So what made you do that?
Well, so many times when I speak, people will say, "Oh my goodness, your stories are so incredible." And I'm like, "You have them too. You just don't do this for a living and excavate your stories," which as speakers we do all the time because we're always looking for those points at which God has intersected in our lives. And so I really wanted to write a book that was for the reader. And so your story is in the book. But I always say to people, there's no pressure on how much or little you write. This is for you to find your stories. And whether you talk it through or write in it, it's really more of an experience than a book this time.
It really is. I felt like a participant along the way.
Yeah.
But I think the contents of it is so good, and it's exactly what we're talking about on the podcast right now. We're really talking about how before we can identify where we're at in our story and in our map to figure out where we're going, we also have to look back to see where we've come from. And so what is it to you? Why is it so important for us to understand kind of what's behind us before we really establish what's ahead of us?
Well, a couple things come to mind. First of all, we read the word remember a lot in the Bible. So apparently God knows there's something in us remembering the way he has worked in order so that we can have faith for the things that we don't see right now that we're living. And I also think the second aspect of remembering is that you realize that the story goes on after you think it's over, or a crisis happens, or a door is closed, or something happens that is actually the beginning of something else. And you only know that looking back, because when you're in the middle of it,
Yeah.
you don't see what's ahead. But looking back on your stories, you can recognize that some things you thought were one thing ended up being something else. That happened because I was supposed to meet this person, or,
Right.
that didn't happen because I was supposed to go here or do this. And you begin to see your life exactly the way you just talked about, as a journey, that you are in the middle of a map that God has for you, but you're working with Him in concert. So I think looking back helps us see that we have to hold on when we're waiting for something, or something's not looking like we want it to know that God isn't finished writing this story. And we can trust by what has happened in the past that He's in it and He's going to do something, and we just need to wait for what He does.
I love that. And I love, journaling personally. And I can only imagine that that's probably an important practice for you. But
Yes, it
um,
has been.
journaling, there's so many times that I've looked back at something I wrote and it was like, woe is me, the end is
Yeah.
near. And then I
Yeah.
look in present time and I'm like, oh, wow, that was such a small part of that my story, or that turned out to be better than I thought. What's a time in your life that you kind of had that moment of like, this is the end, this is the worst it could ever be? I think, and it turned out differently.
Well, I think I've told you the story before. The big marker in my life was when I was going to get married, and I was already old. I was 42, and so my mom had, two showers. So I had every gift in my registry, and I had my wedding dress and bridesmaids dresses. I was engaged for a year and a half. And in the course of that time, my fiance was deployed. And unbeknownst to me, his ex-wife was communicating with him, and she had left him. And so when he came back, we broke up and he remarried his ex-wife, which I always say is a great story. I just didn't like my part in the story. And and for me, it just felt like, I mean, I couldn't believe God was, doing this in a way, allowing this to happen in my life after I've waited for so long. But I now know, looking back, that that was such an important transition in my life. And it wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning, really, of my life as it unfolded, because 4 months later I got a call out of the blue from a friend of mine who had planted a church in Santa Barbara, and only because my engagement had broken up was I in position to even consider such a thing. And I wasn't really looking for a job, but I always say, sometimes the door we're focused on is not the door God opens, but you have to pay attention to that door
Yeah.
because you don't know where it leads. And sure enough, I went up to Santa Barbara, which of course everybody said there's no single people in Santa Barbara. And honestly, Stephen, there aren't very many single people up here, but lo and behold, at 49, I met a great guy, and he had a 6-year-old son, and his wife had actually left him. So it was a long dating relationship, because I was like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
I can't do this again. I can't play this part again. So we went very slow, but eventually did get engaged. It's a beautiful story. We got engaged on a mission trip in Haiti, and he had a 6-year-old son, and his mom had moved to Australia to marry somebody there. So I had the opportunity to be a wife and a mom and all the things that I thought it was too late and all is lost. And so I always say to people, you just don't know what God is going to do in your story. And now I look back on that closed door that happened to me, that was the most painful thing that
Yeah.
happened in my life, and it has been reinterpreted as a blessing. I am so thankful I didn't marry that guy. But at
Yeah.
the time, I couldn't see anything else, and felt like I was already old and it wasn't ever going to happen again. And And so you have to trust him for what you don't yet see. And I mean, that is faith. Hebrews 11:1. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And the only way that you can do that is if you do see what God has done in your life
Yeah.
and you can trust him, just like any other relationship. You know that he's trustworthy, that he will come through, that he probably won't do it the way you have in mind or in the timing that you
Right.
have in mind. And that's really important to let go of too. I think that really comes clear as you look back and realize that some of the ways that God answered your prayers were different than you prayed. But you can see now with the whole story why certain things happened the way they did.
Yeah. And I think the thing that you do so well in this book is you help identify different ways that we can track God in our lives. And
Mhm.
I think maybe the pessimist is like, yeah, but you have no idea how bad it's been, and
Mhm.
there's no way you could see God in this story. And
Mhm.
so many of the ways that you talk about tracking are through pain and
Yeah.
through upside down circumstances and through those closed doors. And I think that's an important part of this in my life anyways, is that it's not looking back and seeing only the good things of the evidence of God, but
Mhm.
it's how
Mhm.
he showed up in the bad things. And one of the things you do right away in the intro is you touch on something that most people that grew up in the church had in a picture on their parents' wall, the footprints in the sand.
Yes.
My
Yes.
parents did. It was in the
Yeah.
entryway to their bedroom. I
Yes.
remember it. But that
Yes.
that famous kind of poem, that picture of, the one foot tracks and, where were you, God? So what is that in relation to our stories and your understanding of this journey?
Well, that's one of those poems that's so old it's new again. Honestly, I can't
Yeah.
believe that there are people in this generation who have never heard the poem because, like you, I grew up, it was like the first thing I saw when I became a Christian. And but it always stuck with me, that image, and basically the story of a man walking along the beach and he's looking back on his life, and the beach is symbolic of his life. And where he sees two sets of footprints, he assumes that God was with him, and where he sees only one, he assumes he was alone. And then he notices that those were the most painful, difficult times of his life. So he cries out to God, "Why did you abandon me in my darkest moments?" Which I think is a cry that we have when we're going through things.
Yeah.
And God says, "I didn't abandon you. That was when I carried you." And so that kind of perspective shift, that the single set of footprints were actually God's footprints. And I don't think you see that a lot of times when you're going through something. So anybody who's listening who's going through a difficult time, it doesn't feel like God is carrying you. But when you
Right.
look back and begin to look for the evidence of God, and as I said, sometimes you have to look in different places than you were thinking it would come.
Yeah.
But the ways maybe that he used that painful time in your life, or actually your pain becomes your ministry. Like, because of what I went through, I have a big ministry to single people, people who are single longer than they'd like. They don't usually ask people who get married in their 20s about their story.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
I understand that pain, or the pain of not being able to actually bear a child. I raised a child, but I've never had a biological. So the losses in our lives actually become sometimes the most significant things of our lives that we have to give for other people. And I mean, I loved it so much that I know you showed the book, but that's why I had these footprints. And if you feel them, Stephen, you can actually feel the footprints in the sand. So
Yeah.
I was really excited when the book had that visceral reminder of God's footprints. So,
I think anybody can kind of begin to do this process. And again, that's
mhm,
as we kind of bring this to an end in a little bit here, I'm going to actually give some instructions for people when it comes to a challenge of, all right, now let's do this. Let's recognize those times that God has carried you. Let's recognize those
mhm,
places. But you talk about, I don't know if it was 7 or 8, but different ways that we can track God? And you don't have to give them all or all in detail,
Mhm.
but what are some of the ways that we can track God in our stories and in our lives?
Sure. I talk about, well, I begin with hearing God, all the different ways we hear God. There's whole books on that. So I just touch on it, but I think that's kind of where you have to start in how do I actually even hear God in my life? But I move into open and closed doors, and I talk about how closed doors can be evidence of God as much as open ones. I talk about timing and coincidences. I talk about risks that we've taken in our lives. And one of the chapters that's the most popular is when the script gets flipped. So I talk about how, when your life doesn't go the way you planned, it's an opportunity. Just like if you were on a plane and all of a sudden the pilot did something that you didn't pay your ticket for, you're going,
Right.
wait a minute. All of a sudden you're interested in the pilot, whereas you maybe wouldn't have been otherwise if everything was going the way you wanted it to. And then, of course, there's a whole chapter on pain. And then one of the features of the book is that at the end, there's a page that's a stone pile. And you get to put one thing from each chapter that was kind of the moment that God met you. And really, that's what this is, Stephen. I want to be clear that you don't have to be a journaler to do this book. You can talk
Yeah.
through the book with a small group or a friend or a spouse. It's really about you finding your God stories so that you will remember the way God has worked so that you can look for him in those ways as you're living confusing circumstances.
That's really good. And I think, the stones comes from Joshua and placing them
Mhm.
in the Jordan River. And you also share a variety of other biblical precedences and you know, times where remembering comes
Mhm.
in. Like I think that's something that for me has been important is this is a God thing. Like this is him reminding
Mhm.
us to remember because I know how forgetful I am, you know. And
Exactly.
I just think of the Israelites just escaping Egypt and having
Yeah.
complained for years and years about how hard it is. They get out
Right.
and then like, why did you bring us out here to die? And
Right.
I
I
think
know.
there's
It's like
times that we
we
need that
just
reminder.
laugh. We
Yeah,
laugh reading it, but we are those people. I mean, how many
exactly.
times have you left church and then been stressed about something that's happening in your life and you just left church an hour ago, We're all the same way, totally. Exactly. So,
So I think that's why it's so cool to actually build these markers or the language that I like to use is pins, like pins in our map, and we
mm,
have where we're
hmm
at and where we're going, but
hmm
there's so many times that we do have to look back at where we came from and what are some of the kind of benefits of looking back.
Well, I mean, what you just said, we have one pin and we have the other pin, but there's a lot in between those two pins. And I think one of the things that we benefit from looking back is realizing the journey is different than we thought it was going to be. It takes a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot that is involved in those twists and turns, whether it's something you did maybe or something that was done to you that we didn't have control over. And I think it's really important for us to see that that's the way God works. And I love thinking about the Israelites walking everywhere, when they see the stone piles, like when Jacob left his stone pile altar after God met him in the dream, and just how that must have encouraged them to
Yeah.
see these altars and go, oh my gosh, God met somebody here. And I think what we don't realize is that our stories are needed. It's not just about taking someone to church and giving them a Bible, which are very important things, but it's also about the ability to be able to share how God has shown up in your life. God wants all of us to share. That's partly why he does the work he does in our lives. And so I really hope this book will help people not only find their God stories, but be able to share them with people around them, our kids, our grandkids. This is what the faith is passed along through our
Yeah.
stories.
I think that's a important aspect of not only the book, but just this idea is that it is beneficial to those
Mhm.
around us. That um, there's so many of us, I think, that we live having experienced the miracle that we haven't paid attention to, and
Yeah.
that we've experienced provision, and either we've forgotten about it or we just haven't taken time to recognize that it was there. And I know I was telling you before we started recording about my recent tax experience, and there was pain involved in it, but there was
Yeah.
also this
Hmm.
cool moment where, as I was piecing these things together, seeing how God provided over this past year kind of gave me hope and faith for this next season.
Right.
But I know as I've written more of my story and observed more of my story, it's created opportunities for me to share it with other people and share it
Hmm.
with those around me. And so I think that's why I'm really passionate about this idea of not only for ourselves and for recognizing the future. Because the other thing too, and I want to hear your perspective on this, but sometimes we look back and we see the wrong turns and
Oh, yeah.
we see the pitfalls that we fell into.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, I've always recognized by having that overview, I can say, okay, I went down that path. I disobeyed God in that way. I responded to a person that way. I handled a
Hmm.
situation that way. I don't want to do that in the future. Or I was parented in this way. This is a story for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And this is
Hmm.
how my parents did this. I don't want to do it that way.
Hmm.
And so I think
Hmm.
we bypass so much of even the lessons God wants to show us by kind of
Hmm.
avoiding that. And so speak to that and also just speak to why is it hard for some of us to do what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that the biggest intimidation that causes people maybe not to do this is I'm not a self-reflective person. I don't journal. I'm not, and I tell people everyone has a story. My husband and I are actually talking through the book right now, because
Okay.
he doesn't have the time to journal every day and do that. And so we'll just take a couple of questions every day. And I mean, it is so great to learn that way with a friend or with a spouse or somebody. The other thing that I think is so important is as we all look back, faith is way more caught than taught. And, our parents could be taking us to church and all the things, but if we aren't actually seeing how this works in our life, once you leave and you have a choice whether to go to church or continue on in the faith,
Right.
unless you've seen something really work and it doesn't mean that we're perfect, just like what you just said. I actually think just the opposite. When we're real with our kids about the hard times, the times when we're struggling with God. I mean, look at Job. My gosh, the whole book is him crying out to God, screaming and yelling, and yet he's the one at the end that's commended by Job. I mean, by God.
Yeah.
So I think that that's so important to recognize that God wants us to be honest. It's just about living life with Him and what it's like and keeping short accounts and trying to do the right thing. And I think your kids then see a real vibrant faith when you're taking risks, when you're actually living this
Right.
life rather than just doing the rituals of the Christian faith, if that makes sense. And so I think that's why, this book, it also unearths discussion in families. I know one mom who bought it for her kids just so they could start tracking God in their life and seeing,
Mm.
choices that they're making and how God's in that and what he's been doing. Because I think what you recognize is, every person who came into your life, God put that person into your life. The whole reason you even know anything about God is because of maybe people that have been brought into your life. And I know and recognize that some of that is not always positive. And
Right.
so you have to be able to discern that. But as we look back, we can see places where God put us in position to hear and see things. And I always say, even just waking up in the morning. I mean, you just talked about like looking back at your taxes and realizing things. Man, if you can find God in your taxes, you can find them anywhere. But I just think of everyone waking up and just that people would believe that it all just happened. The people around them all just happened, or the creation that they see. I mean, sometimes we're moved by a sunset or a rainbow or things like that, but just life itself, I
Yeah.
mean, not to get overly spiritual about everything, but God is screaming all around us all the time.
Yeah.
All we have to do is open our eyes to see him. So that's what I hope most of all that this book will help people do.
For sure. And it gives that 30,000 foot view you talk about as
Hmm.
well. In
Hmm.
and I've been on long road trips. I lived on the East Coast for a short time and made that drive back and forth from the Midwest more times than I would like. And but there's many times that all it shows you is like a little bit of blue in front of you. But when you
Yeah,
kind of zoom out, whether it's to find a gas station, you actually
right.
are able to see how much ground you've covered. And I think that's another huge thing that people do miss out on oftentimes is that we just see the little blue in front of us and it doesn't seem
Right.
like it's ever going to end. But when
No,
we get that bird's eye view, we can see we've made a lot of progress and we're still on track.
that's
And
right.
and I think that that is a cool gift that this not only the book but also just the act of remembering
Hmm.
can do. And there's I like the examples that you share because I think it allows it's all your book is all about this is your story, you get to write it, but your stories kind of help unlock things. And one
Hmm.
that I found really interesting was when your dad got remarried. And
Mm.
you talk about you were 22 and your dad married somebody who is only a few years older than you, and
Hmm.
how difficult that was in that time, but how God used that whole situation and what it's become. So, talk about that for a second.
So yeah, I was 22. My dad was 45 and she was 25. And it was 5 years after my parents' divorce. So it wasn't, any situation of him
Right.
leaving my mom for her. But I really could not believe this was happening. This is definitely not the script in my life.
Right.
And now, to this day, they are still married, and my dad's in his 80s, and she has been the most wonderful wife and mom. I have a couple of more sisters in the family, but what she has meant to the family over time has completely changed the story. And that's one real life example of why we have to stay in the story. And it's not that you have to feel the way you're going to feel someday, but it
Yeah.
gives you hope that maybe the story is going to change, that maybe this isn't the end. And I always say, if you got up this morning and you're still breathing, God's not through with your story. And I just
Yeah.
think sometimes we have to tell ourselves that. Like, I don't know why I'm up this morning because it feels like all is lost because of this circumstance. But let God continue to write your story. And I think looking back helps us realize that. And certainly that situation helps me. Just last Friday night, we were together with my dad and her, and my husband has become so close to her, and she has just been an incredible caretaker for my dad. So
Mhm.
this story really has transformed.
Yeah, and you said it a couple times, but speak to stay in the story because I think that is such a powerful line, but the encouragement is even more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, when you're facing an ending, stay in the story. I think Ruth and Naomi show us that. Man, if you just read Ruth 1, you'd be like, this is the most depressing thing I've ever read. Everybody dies. And
Yes.
yet that you realize it's only chapter 1, so you're like, oh, well, this must not be the whole story. And that idea, or if you are maybe uncertain of something that's happened in your life, stay in the story. If even if you meet somebody or you think something's about one relationship, stay in the story because it might be about something else. I had a whole thing happened in Haiti that I thought was about one thing. Me and the guy I was dating at the time having this opportunity to go to Haiti, and it was about me meeting someone there who has now been my friend and pastor and responsible for mission trips I've taken in Haiti. That whole trip was for that, not for the, and I
Yeah.
think we see that again looking back where we go, wait a minute, that job ended so that I would be in position to take this and do that. And we don't do that work in our lives very often. We don't look back and like you said, we're kind of just looking at the blue line in front of us. And we're so in our circumstances now that we forget how God has taken us through something or how he's worked in the past. So really, I mean, that's probably the theme of the book, stay in the story. And
Yeah.
I think that's true in our Christian lives as well.
So, as we kind of wrap up, what I want you to do is just to speak to that person right now that is in the middle of the story and is in the middle of kind of that place where they maybe don't see how it's going to get better. Maybe they don't see how those things in their past could even potentially be redeemed because they're so bad or they're so painful still today. Like,
Mhm.
speak to that person just for a few moments.
So I guess I would say you probably feel like you are at the end of whatever it is, or that nothing is ever going to happen. It will always be this way. I think that is a lie that is not true because we know that if we know nothing else, we know it's going to change. Somehow, some way, it will change. And you may have to just live your life right now and look at what is happening versus what is not happening. That was huge for me and still continues to be in those seasons where something that I want or desire so much is not happening, or I'm going through a painful situation or circumstance. God is always giving us opportunities to get involved in another story. And that has been one of the most healing things in my own life in those seasons that went on forever, that I made myself available to maybe do something, volunteer, get involved in somebody else's life, see needs that were bigger than the ones I was in.
Hmm.
And that gave me perspective while I was trying to live and survive certain seasons. And now looking back, those have been some of the most precious stories of my life. So I just would encourage you, again, maybe to open your eyes to what God is doing and how He is meeting you, even in the middle of what you're going through. And one day it will change. I can promise you.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much. This message is needed, and as we continue in the podcast of just kind of exploring this is like the perfect conversation to have. And one of the things though that we do with all of our guests is we talk about anticipation and celebration as being two kind of core habits, core rhythms of instead of just celebrating the big thing, the promotion, the wedding, whatever, to celebrate smaller, and then
Mhm.
anticipation to anticipate sooner. And so what's something right now that you are anticipating in your life? What's something that you're looking forward to?
Well, I'm going to be honest. My husband and I have a trip planned to Europe because
Oh my goodness.
one of the things about traveling is you get miles, and I have friends who live in different places of the world. But in particular, I'm Serbian and 50% actually. And so some of my relatives are actually in Croatia and Bosnia Herzegovina. So we're going to Dubrovnik as part of this time
Okay.
and staying with cousins there that we've gotten to know. And it's such a wonderful, I just love to travel. And
Yeah.
even if it's literally 30 minutes away, I just sometimes I think it's so healthy to do that. Just to get a new perspective, to get in the car and go somewhere if you can't get on a plane. But I'm super excited for that.
That's
So,
so fun. And what's something that you're celebrating right now? Big or
well,
small?
I mean, obviously we've been celebrating the book coming out, and I think more than that, celebrating the effect, as you well know, that it's having on people and how people are uncovering their God stories. I love reading about that or hearing about that, and just getting people excited about this. This has given us, since it just came out, it's given us a lot of joy. Um, but I will tell you that I also celebrate when I eat bread. And that's one of the little I think we need those things, whatever brings you joy.
Yeah.
You can't do it all the time because then it will ruin the joy that it gives you, but you can anticipate treating yourself. I really think it's a big thing that you need to find your treats and space those out in your lives so you will have that just simple pleasure. I totally agree with you.
I love it. I love it. And everybody can agree on that is more treats, more
Right,
treats.
right.
Well, this was so fun. And I know I encourage everybody that's listening to get tracking God in your life. And whether you take the time to write in every question, no matter what, the questions will spark something in you
Mhm.
and to reflect. So, where's the best place people can get the book, but also that they can learn more about what you're doing, follow you on social media, and all that stuff?
Yes, well, I'm on social media as Laurie P. Short. On Instagram is where I'm probably more active, and but I'm also on Facebook as well. And I would say get the book on Amazon. It's the least expensive there, so I think everyone's always looking for the deal. But I maybe what would be good for people to know is I do have a video series that goes with the book on Right Now Media, and a lot of churches
Yes.
subscribe to Right Now Media. So it's a great book to do with a small group. So if you're looking for a 8-week small group experience, this would be a great book to have. So, and I also have the video series on my website if you're not a part of Right Now Media.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link all that. But thanks so much, Lori, for just taking some time to hang out with us today. It's always a treat to catch up with you.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And congratulations on your book too.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll see you later.
I really enjoyed this week's episode with Laurie P. Short. It was so fun just to get to hear her story, how like the importance of tracking God through everything. But what did you enjoy from the episode?
I really enjoyed just like talking to Lori. She is such a kind person. And after we kind of ended the conversation, we talked for a long time and she just kind of spoke into the writing journey and spoke into those things. But also, we just took some time to actually, like, she talked about my story and just how I've been observing God in my life. And so just to have that moment that you guys didn't get to share was really cool, really special. But what was your kind of takeaway from this one?
Yeah, I'm actually going to read it because it was so good. I wrote it
Yes.
down, you know?
Perfect.
But she said, when you begin to look back and look for the evidence of God, you might realize your pain can become your ministry. The losses in our lives can become the most significant thing we can offer other people. And
Yeah.
I was just like, whoa, if that doesn't make you want to read the book and just learn more about what she's gone through and just the importance of reframing the hard things in your life to see what else, like what's the beauty that could come from it. So I loved it.
Yeah. And I loved her rawness in, like, she has walked through some really hard things, but her perspective and how she's really discovered a deeper relationship with God is really impactful. I think everybody can take something away from that. And so this week, we want to give you a challenge, though, to kind of step into this. And this challenge actually comes pretty much straight from her book. And so what we're going to call it is the Creation Clues Challenge. And one of the first exercises Lori gives in her book is to go outside and to find an open space where nature can be observed. So you're around buildings, find a lawn or find a park, and then just sit for 5 minutes and write down everything you notice. And then ask yourself, what did I hear? What did I see? And then what did I notice that a human being did not create that points to a creator? And I think that that's a really cool way to kind of get into this whole idea of tracking God. So just for 5 minutes, find the places and the ways that you can see God and a creator in your midst. And so that's the challenge for this week. Go to our Instagram at EvDayAdventure or my Instagram at Stephen Glosser, and there will be a post. And all you have to do is comment a name or tag a friend in that post. And as many tags as you get, that's how many entries you get. And so you can win this book, and we'll announce that in about a week. So have a great week. We love you. And also subscribe, leave a rating and a review. And we'll see you next week on the Everyday Adventure podcast, not challenge. Just the podcast. We do challenges.
On the podcast.
See ya.